I'm going on a date, she said while standing in front of the bathroom mirror, applying eyeliner like she wasn't married. I was in the hallway holding a Target bag with replacement razor heads and multivitamins, because she said we were out, and I always run the errands. I watched her for a second, not because she looked good, she did, but because she looked unfamiliar. Like someone I'd never met before, someone who didn't leave dishes in the sink for me to scrub or ask me to turn down my breathing during her shows. You hear me, she added, tossing her mascara into her purse. Don't be jealous. Then she laughed. Not a cute laugh. A sharp, metallic laugh, like the sound you hear right before a wire snaps. I didn't say anything. Not then. I just went to the kitchen, put the bag down next to the untouched spaghetti I made, sat at the table, and opened my laptop. The file was already open. I'd been writing in it for 3 weeks. Every night after she fell asleep, curled away from me like I was something she accidentally brushed against, I typed the final line. This is your choice, and here is mine. Then I hit print. I didn't plan to give it to her today. I really didn't. I figured I'd wait until after her birthday, or at least the holidays. But when someone looks you in the eye and says she's going on a date like she's talking about a dentist appointment, that's not your wife anymore. That's someone else, and you owe that someone the truth. So when she came down the stairs 10 minutes later, heels clicking like gunshots, perfume thick enough to make the cat sneeze, I handed her the folded paper without a word. She rolled her eyes. What's this, another passive-aggressive poem? I said nothing. She opened it. Read the first paragraph. Then the second. Then stopped blinking. I watched her mouth move as she read. Then her jaw clenched. And then, silence. No more smirks. No more laughs. Just her, frozen in place, mascara wand still in her hand, suddenly realizing I was never going to beg again. She didn't speak for 38 seconds. I know because I counted. Her eyes darted back and forth as if trying to find a loophole in what I'd written, a way to make it disappear, like everything else she never wanted to deal with. But this time there was no escape hatch. Just her, standing in our living room, holding a letter that dismantled the fantasy she'd been living in. One paragraph at a time. You went through my phone? She finally asked, her voice low and razor-edged. I nodded once. Not ashamed. Not apologetic. Just done pretending I hadn't noticed the late-night texts from Braylon, the random spa days that ended with smeared lipstick and receipts from restaurants I've never been to, or the lies about book club that somehow included a 2 a.m. Uber ride to a rooftop bar. I didn't need to hire a private investigator. I just had to stop lying to myself. Her mouth opened to argue, but I cut her off, gently but firmly. You don't get to play the victim in a story you wrote. She looked like she wanted to throw something. Maybe the vase by the door, or the letter still trembling in her hand. But I think the weight of what was coming next kept her still. Because the letter didn't just detail what I knew, it outlined what I'd done about it. I'd spoken with a lawyer. Quietly. I'd collected evidence. Respectfully. I'd rerouted my paycheck to a separate account and paused my direct contributions to her student loans. She hadn't noticed because she never checked the statements. I always handled the boring stuff. I also removed myself from the lease on her studio downtown, the one I'd been secretly paying part of. She thought I didn't know about it. She thought it was just a creative escape space. Turns out it was more of an escape from me space. She set the letter down like it burned her fingers. So what? This is it? No, I said, standing slowly. That was just the forward. She blinked. What? I walked to the side drawer by the coat rack and pulled out a second envelope, thicker than the first. This one was addressed to someone else entirely, her boss, to be exact. Because what she didn't know was that the man she'd been dating wasn't just married. He was also her direct supervisor. And the messages I'd seen weren't just explicit. They were incriminating. She stepped back. You wouldn't. I already did, I said. I left it in his wife's mailbox this morning. Her face went white. Not angry white. Collapse in on itself white. She reached out to grab the edge of the table to steady herself, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. For once, the woman who always had something clever to say was speechless. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. That's not who I am. I'm just a guy who loved too hard and for too long, and finally learned how to stop. She sat down in silence. For the first time in months, maybe years, she looked small. Not physically, emotionally. Like the mask she wore had finally slipped, and underneath it wasn't confidence. It was panic. But I wasn't done yet. I reached for the keys on the counter, my keys, and walked to the door. I left a copy of the letter for your parents too, since they were always so concerned about what I brought to this marriage. Elwood, she whispered. First time she'd said my name in weeks. I didn't look back. I just said what needed to be said. You don't have to go on your date tonight, I said, because you already lost the only man who ever showed up for you. And with that, I walked out into the night, not to get revenge, just to finally breathe. I drove around for an hour after I left. No destination, no music, just the sound of my thoughts bouncing off the inside of my skull like nails in a dryer. I kept picturing her face when she read that letter, the sudden shift from smugness to silence. I should have felt vindicated, proud. But the truth? I just felt hollow, like I'd finally won the argument, but lost something I didn't even know was still valuable to me. At one point, I pulled over at an empty grocery store lot and just sat there. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead like dying flies. My phone buzzed too, once, twice, then 14 times in a row. I didn't even check. I knew it was her. I knew the rhythm of her panic. She was probably begging, bargaining, rewriting history in real time. That's how she operated. Tear down, deny, reverse, plead. But I wasn't ready for what came next. My phone rang again. But this time, it wasn't her. It was a number I didn't recognize, local area code, but not saved in my contacts. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I answered. Elwood, the voice said, quiet, hesitant. It was Trent, her sister's husband, a guy I barely interacted with outside of holidays and forced dinners. We had nothing in common except enduring the same in-laws. He always seemed a little too reserved, like he knew something and chose to keep it buried. Turns out, I was right. I just got a text from Serena, he said. Your wife's sister. She's freaking out. Said something about you exposing Harper and Mason. That name hit me like a shovel to the chest. Mason, not Braylon. She had told me the guy she was talking to, the one from the texts, was named Braylon. A co-worker. Young. Single. Disposable. It helped soften the blow. But Mason? Mason Whitlock was not single. He was her boss. He was married. And he had been in our living room. Twice. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Elwood, listen, Trent continued, lowering his voice. You didn't hear this from me, but this isn't new. Not with Mason. Serena told me something a few months ago. Said they were emotionally close. I thought it was gossip. But now, my grip tightened on the steering wheel. So this wasn't just a recent thing. It had roots. Roots that spread into her family. Into people who'd known and said nothing. People who smiled at me over birthday cake while my wife was sleeping with someone from her board meetings. Trent kept talking, but I barely heard him. I ended the call after a few more vague warnings and passive apologies. Then, for the first time that night, I checked my texts. There were over 20 from Harper. All variations of the same cycle: denial, bargaining, rage, guilt, silence. Then one final message that stopped me cold. He told me he'd leave her. I didn't know it would get this far. So it was never just about having fun or being spontaneous. She was planning an exit. Not from me, but around me. Like I was the obstacle she had to quietly step over to get to her next chapter. That's when I made a U-turn. I wasn't going home. I was going to see Mason's wife. I had no plan. No speech rehearsed. I didn't even know what I'd say. But she deserved to know. Someone had to pull the fire alarm in that burning house. And if no one else had the guts to do it, I would. It was 9:42 p.m. when I pulled up outside their house. Lights on. Her SUV in the driveway. The kind of calm, quiet suburb where affairs are swept under throw rugs and everyone waves while choking on secrets. I got out of the car, took the envelope I'd originally planned to mail, and walked up to the door. I rang the bell once. And when she opened it, the look in her eyes told me. She already knew. She didn't say a word when she opened the door. Just stood there in yoga pants and a faded Dartmouth sweatshirt, barefoot, one hand still clutching a tea mug. Her eyes were red, not from crying recently, but from crying a lot, like someone who'd been living in a storm she pretended was weather. I held up the envelope, and she gave a bitter laugh. You too, huh? I didn't know what that meant yet, but it told me I wasn't the first man tonight standing on that doorstep, shattered but trying to look composed. She stepped aside and motioned me in without a word. I hesitated. This wasn't exactly something you rehearse, but I stepped in. The house smelled like cinnamon and tension. There were kids' drawings on the fridge, 3 backpacks by the stairs, and a single pair of men's dress shoes sitting at the edge of the carpet. Mason's shoes. She took the envelope and set it on the coffee table without opening it. I already know, she said quietly. But not everything. I'm guessing. I sat on the edge of the couch, unsure if I should speak first or just let her lead. But she didn't need prompting. I found their texts months ago, she said, her voice thin. Back in June. They were being sloppy. He kept calling her H, like that's some uncrackable code. I confronted him. He swore it was emotional. Just leaning on each other. You know the script. I nodded slowly. I knew the script. I could quote it by heart now. I tried to believe him. For the kids. For the image. For my own damn ego, if I'm being honest, she said, brushing hair from her face. But then she started showing up in our life. Casually. A charity brunch here. A board dinner there. Always just outside the spotlight. Always just close enough. She paused and finally looked me in the eyes. I didn't know she was married. She is, I said. To me. And just like that, something in her broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But something cracked. A deep, internal snap that echoed louder than a scream. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the envelope again. But this time she opened it. I didn't watch her read it. I looked around the room instead. Photos of happy children. A family calendar with piano recitals and soccer practice. A life built carefully, quietly, like mine, now shattered on a weekday night because two people thought they were special enough to be above consequences. She finished reading and set the letter down, her breathing shallow. They were planning something, she said after a long silence. You know that, right? I turned to her slowly. What do you mean? I overheard them on the phone once, she said, voice shaking. They were talking in that fake corporate language, like it was a project. She said, after the audit, and he said, Q1 transition. That's not how people talk about an affair. That's how people talk when they're plotting to replace someone. I felt something cold crawl up the back of my neck. She wanted your life, she continued. Your silence. Your savings. Your absence. And Mason, well, he wanted mine too. I stood up slowly. You think they were going to blindside both of us? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes said enough. This wasn't just a messy betrayal. It was a merger. A quiet, calculated shift in which two people decided to end two marriages not with war, but with paperwork, misdirection, and quiet erasure. She looked up at me. They don't know we've talked. No, I said. Not yet. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between us. Not revenge. Not collusion. Just the shared weight of two people who'd been carefully erased and who'd just decided to write themselves back into the story. We sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes after that. Just me and Mason's wife. Her name was Evelyn, by the way, though she didn't offer it, and I didn't ask. Some people earn your name by hurting you, and some earn it by sitting beside you while the smoke is still rising. She finally stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to check the street. Then she sighed, a sound full of tired years and suppressed rage. He's not coming home tonight, she said. He usually doesn't when she travels. I stared at her. Travels? She turned to me, one eyebrow raised. Your wife? She told you she was home? I nodded slowly, trying to remember the last time Harper had spent the night out. She said she was staying at her sister's house tonight. That they were doing some wellness retreat thing. Yoga and green smoothies. Evelyn actually laughed. A short, humorless exhale. She's at the Treston Hotel. Room 924. Same room every time. He books it under his assistant's name to avoid his name showing up on the records. I didn't ask how she knew that. She didn't offer. Some wounds are so deep they come with their own intelligence network. I stood up, suddenly lightheaded. So they're together right now? Unless they've choked each other with silk scarves and died mid-act, she said flatly. Yeah, I'd say so. I felt a strange mix of fury and freedom. The kind of electric stillness you feel in the eye of a hurricane. When everything goes quiet, and you realize the storm isn't over, it's just catching its breath. Evelyn crossed her arms and looked me over. You want to go there, don't you? I hesitated. I want to burn that hotel to the damn ground. She nodded slowly, then tilted her head. Let's not. Not yet. That's what they expect. Screaming. Violence. Chaos. But what if we give them something they don't expect? I narrowed my eyes. Like what? She walked over to a drawer, pulled out a black leather planner, flipped it open, and showed me something that made my stomach twist. A list of dates. Hotel visits, dinners, expense reports. She had receipts, literally. She'd been collecting evidence not for revenge, but for leverage. I'm divorcing him, she said, but on my terms. And I'm taking half of everything he thinks he's hiding. I felt a sharp chill run down my back. And me? You, she said. You're going to give your wife exactly what she asked for. I didn't follow. Evelyn gave a sly smile for the first time all night. Not cruel, just knowing. She said she was going on a date, she said. So let her enjoy it. Don't interrupt. Don't call. Don't explode. Let her think you're broken and small and crying somewhere in a parked car. Let her come home to silence. To an empty house. To a letter you leave behind saying you've given her the space she clearly wanted. I swallowed hard. You think that's enough? She closed the planner and leaned against the table. No, but it's how we start. I didn't leave with fire in my chest. I left with ice. With calm. With clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was moving with intention. When I got home, I packed. Not all of it, just the essentials. Enough to make it real. I left her side of the closet untouched, her makeup scattered across the bathroom sink, like always. I left a single folded note on her pillow, 5 words long. You finally got your freedom. And then I left. But not to disappear. To watch. Because the only thing more devastating than being left is being left out of the plan. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't. I didn't try. I stayed in a rented studio apartment above a locksmith shop 2 towns over. One of those places with peeling wallpaper and buzzing ceiling lights that never fully turn off. The bed was stiff, the sheets smelled like bleach, and the walls were thin enough to hear a guy next door have an emotional breakdown at 3 a.m. That part, oddly, was comforting. Misery loves company. I didn't feel like a man falling apart anymore. I felt like a man waiting. By 7 a.m., I knew she was home. I'd set up a motion alert camera outside the house days ago, not for revenge, just clarity. I watched through my phone as Harper pulled into the driveway in the same clothes she wore when she left. Red dress. Hair messy now. Heels in her hand. She moved slowly, like someone returning to a crime scene, unsure if the blood's still wet. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stood in the entryway for a full 30 seconds. Just staring. That was the moment she realized the silence wasn't normal silence. It was intentional. There were no shoes by the door. No hum of the fridge I unplugged the night before. No coat hanging on the hook. She turned toward the living room, then paused. The letter was on the table. Not the same one from before. This one was shorter. 5 pages, single-spaced, typed carefully over the last 2 hours while the sun came up and a delivery truck kept backing up outside the locksmith shop. The first page was kind, measured. I thanked her for the good years. I acknowledged the things we'd built. I even took responsibility for my part in letting the rot spread, the blind spots, the emotional distance, the compromises I made to keep the peace. The second page shifted. I laid out the timeline, the receipts, the things she never knew I saw. I didn't insult her. I didn't moralize. I just documented. It was boring, clinical, devastating. The third page? That was for Evelyn. I told Harper that I'd spoken with Mason's wife, that the illusion of secrecy was gone, that every lie she built was now connected, exposed, and in someone else's hands. I told her Evelyn had leverage, that it was no longer just between us. The circle had widened. Page 4 was financial. I listed the accounts I'd closed, the cards I'd removed myself from, the subscriptions I let lapse. I gave her the passwords she'd need, the contacts she'd have to update. It was the most brutal kind of farewell, practical. The final page? Just one sentence. You chose him, now figure out what that actually means. I watched on camera as she read. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there like someone holding an eviction notice for a home she thought she owned. She sat down, eventually, and stayed there for almost an hour. Then she did something I didn't expect. She picked up her phone, dialed a number, and waited. It wasn't Mason. It was my mother. I watched her lips move, pleading, maybe trying to get ahead of the narrative. My mom didn't answer. That part stung more than I expected. Because even now, Harper thought she could salvage the optics. Maybe she thought my mom would talk me down, convince me to come home. Maybe she thought playing the lost wife card still worked. But those days were gone. Later that evening, I got a message from an unknown number. It just said, "You made your point. What do you want?" No greeting. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had been destroyed. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I didn't know how to answer, but because, for the first time, I did. When Harper didn't respond to my message right away, I didn't feel the slightest bit of relief. It was almost as if I were still waiting for her to hit me with something I couldn't anticipate. The silence between us wasn't peaceful. It was thick, suffocating. I knew she was processing, probably plotting some kind of counterattack. Maybe she was trying to reach Mason, trying to pull him back into the narrative before it completely slipped away from them. But what Harper didn't know, and what I didn't care to tell her, was that I wasn't waiting for her response anymore. I wasn't waiting for the phone call or the apology. I was watching the clock tick down to when the walls would start to crumble. I was waiting for her to face the inevitable, the truth about Mason. I hadn't just left her a letter. I'd left her a trail, one that she hadn't been able to follow until now. See, while I'd been planning my escape, the quiet, methodical one, I hadn't just been documenting her lies. I'd been digging into his. For weeks, I'd been quietly tracing Mason's movements, tracking receipts, cross-referencing phone records, checking his social media. And by the time I left, I had something no one saw coming. The truth was, Mason hadn't been cheating just with Harper. He'd been seeing someone else, a lot of someone else's. But the real twist? One of those someone else's was someone close to home. Someone Harper never expected. Someone she trusted. Evelyn had no idea. Neither did I, at first. But Mason had been involved in a much more complicated game than any of us realized. He wasn't just playing with his marriage. He was playing with both of us, using us as pawns in his own power play. Evelyn was a piece on his board, but she didn't have all the pieces. And Harper? She was just one of the pieces he was going to discard once he was done with her. As the days wore on, I sat in that dingy studio apartment, living in a kind of detached clarity. It was strange how far removed I felt from everything, like I was observing my own life from a distance. But I knew, deep down, I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I decided to wait just a little longer before I made the final move. I wasn't rushing in. I wasn't going to give Harper the satisfaction of seeing me squirm. No, this time, I would let her make the next mistake. And it didn't take long. The next message came at midnight. A simple, "I need to talk." I didn't reply immediately. I let the message sit there for hours, just as her silence had been hanging over me. It felt good, actually. Liberating, even, to not jump at every beep and buzz of my phone. To not wait for her to tell me her side of the story, her justification for why she'd done what she did. I'd already heard it in the letters, in the texts, in the glances I'd caught when she thought I wasn't looking. I waited until 3 a.m. to send my response. "We need to talk too. But this time, you don't get to control the conversation." I didn't even have to wait for her to process it. I knew she was going to call, or text back, or try to manipulate her way out of the corner I'd backed her into. But I didn't care. I had one thing she didn't, the full truth. At 8 a.m., the next morning, the phone rang. It was Harper. "Where are you?" she asked, voice trembling, but not in the way it used to. There was no anger or defiance in her tone, just desperation. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to stop lying to yourself," I said. "About Mason. About everything." There was a pause, a long one, before she spoke again. "What do you mean?" I leaned back, feeling a sick satisfaction in the cold calmness that was taking over my voice. I knew this conversation was a gamble, but the truth always is. "I know about Mason's other projects," I said slowly. "The ones you don't know about. The ones he's been hiding from both of us." Her voice wavered, but she didn't interrupt. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Mason loves me." I let out a long breath. "No, Harper. He doesn't. And neither do you. Not the way you think." The phone went silent again, and for the first time in this entire mess, I felt the upper hand. Because I knew something she didn't, something that would make everything fall apart. And the best part? I wasn't going to rush it. "You think I'm just going to let this slide?" she finally asked, her voice quieter now. Not angry, scared. Mason doesn't get to make decisions for us anymore." I interrupted. "You want to see who's in control now? Meet me at the Treston Hotel. 10:30, room 924. And with that, I hung up. The drive to the Treston Hotel felt like an eternity. But this time, I wasn't anxious. I wasn't furious. I was just calm. For the first time in months, everything felt strangely clear. I wasn't walking into that hotel as the man who had been betrayed. I was walking in as someone who'd regained his agency. The chaos of the last few weeks, the lies, the secrets, it all started to feel less like an overwhelming force and more like a distant echo. I pulled into the parking lot and parked in the far corner, under the cover of a streetlight, where no one would see me. I stayed in the car for a few minutes, just breathing, reminding myself that no matter what happened next, I was taking control. At exactly 10:30, I walked into the hotel lobby. The air smelled like fresh linens and expensive perfume. The front desk clerk barely glanced up as I asked for the key to room 924. She handed it to me with a smile, completely unaware of the storm brewing just behind the quiet doors of this luxury hotel. I walked down the hallway, my steps deliberate, the sound of my shoes echoing in the emptiness. When I reached the door, I knocked. I could hear movement inside. I braced myself. The door swung open. It wasn't Harper standing there. It was Mason. He looked surprised. No, more than that. He looked scared. He was in his suit, disheveled, like he'd just been caught in a lie too big to hide. Elwood. His voice was shaky. What are you? I pushed past him, walked into the room, and shut the door behind me. I didn't say a word. He followed me, standing awkwardly near the window, unsure of how to play the moment. But this wasn't about him. Not anymore. I'm not here for you, I finally said, my voice calm and steady. I'm here for her. He blinked, confused. Her? Harper appeared from the bathroom doorway, dressed in the same red dress she wore when she left the house days ago. But now, there was no pride in her posture, no smirk. Just tired eyes and a tight-lipped expression, like she didn't know whether to apologize or act like nothing had changed. I turned to face her, my gaze firm but not cold. I've been waiting for you to realize something, Harper. You can't keep running from what you've done. But I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to beg or yell. She swallowed hard, her eyes flicking between me and Mason. What do you want from me? Her voice trembled, but there was no defiance in it anymore. Just raw vulnerability. I want you to face what you've built, I said, my tone even. The lies, the secrets, the relationships built on false promises. It's all here, in this room, staring at you. But you don't have to stay in it. You don't have to be defined by it. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked at me, at Mason, then back at the floor, clearly conflicted, but there was something different in her now. I could see the wall breaking down, piece by piece. I'm sorry, she whispered, barely audible. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to stop. I took a step toward her, my hand reaching out. You've already started, by finally seeing the truth. And with that, the storm that had been brewing for so long finally quieted. The silence that followed was different this time, not filled with anger, not filled with tension. It was the kind of silence you feel when the heavy rain stops, leaving behind a fresh breeze. A new beginning. We stood there for a moment, just the three of us, not as enemies, but as people who had been caught in something far bigger than any of us realized. And for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I didn't need to destroy her. I didn't need to tear apart Mason's life. The truth had already done that. Take your things, I said softly. Move forward, but do it with honesty. And maybe, just maybe, we'll all start to heal. With one last look, I turned and walked out of that room. Not as a victim, but as someone who had finally let go. The hardest part of all was over. Now, we could all breathe.